Okay, again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone out here. This is Diwakar, and I have the QA quality engineering practice at Trigent. And I have with me a very, very exciting guest, somebody whom I have a lot of regard for. In fact, a lot of people in the world have a lot of regard for him, but we'll come to that. So thanks for joining in, and hope you'll enjoy the next 1 hour as we take you all through quality engineering trends. A little bit about Trigent before we really dive in. Trigent has been an IT services systems integrator over the last 25 plus years. And a lot of what we do is working with clients and helping them in their digital transformation. We work across a wide set of technologies from IoT to AR/VR to blockchains to DevOps to cloud migrations, and of course, quality engineering practice that I had is a fairly significant chunk of what we do within Trigent. We work with clients across a variety of industries, from banking to insurance, transportation and logistics, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, and we've been lucky enough to be amongst the 10 most admired companies. We are recognized by Clutch. We have been winners of the Best Agile Project at the North American Software Testing Awards, recognized by Zinnov, and also as a major player in NelsonHall's NEAT report that they publish annually. Again, from a quality engineering perspective, a wide spectrum of quality engineering services, from helping you set up and improve your quality engineering services to focusing on customer experience across not just functional journey, but also, across different devices, across cloud, looking at your microservices so that your end-to-end journeys work seamlessly, or at least you have a fair assessment of the risk that your business faces. Right? We back it up with what I call intelligent automation and intelligent judicious automation, with which builds in a bit of AI into the frameworks that we bring onto the table, and also help automate not just functional workflows but APIs across mobile devices and across test data that you have. One of the key things that we also do as a part and we consider essential to delivering a great customer experience is assuring performance. That the experience has a superior performance, is secure, and is accessible to people with special needs, and across a wide variety of platforms and enterprises also. So that's in a nutshell what Trigent is. I just want to, I have a little bit of a recollection of a year back when we started engaging with NelsonHall and engaging Dominique in particular, when we were looking to benchmark a lot of our quality engineering services against peers, as well as to look at what the buy side really wants. We talked to different analysts, we talked to consultants or analyst advisors, we talk to peers, we talk to our customers, and we talk to even people in quality engineering organizations across the world. And one of the key things that came back was, why don't you guys talk to NelsonHall? And the prime reason that they said that you talk to NelsonHall was, speak to Dominique first, and then after that, you can decide whether you want to get engaged or not. And our interactions with Dominique gave us a rich sense of his depth and knowledge of the QE marketplace as a whole, and the fact that he was also respected by both the buy side as well as people and organizations whom he evaluated or assessed as a part of. So a great pleasure, Dominique, to have you on this webinar. I have seen one side of you. I would like you to put across your perspective of yourself and NelsonHall, and then we can get started on this conversation.
Thank you, Diwakar. Certainly, thanks for flattering me. I enjoyed it very much. But more seriously, quick word about myself, not to bore you to death, but really my job is to compare offerings in QA. So that's what I've been doing for the past 4 years. And really looking more recently next-gen offerings, so continuous testing, AI, and so forth. So I'm delighted to be here today. And as I said, and as Diwakar mentioned, we both assist both vendors and clients in assessing the offerings that are suitable for them. That was me in a nutshell.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. Appreciate that. This is a brief of what we want to cover. And one of the things that what we within Trigent realized that a lot of practices, while a lot of organizations do have great quality engineering practices and come at varying degrees, what we also felt was that over a period of time, some of these organizations could potentially improve. One way that they could improve was by looking at what is the QE market or the quality engineering market really looking at. So we thought we'd cover that as a part of what we wanted to cover here. What were the drivers? What are the changes that's happening in quality engineering? How are the new principles of DevOps, continuous testing, and automation coming together? What are the trends that we're seeing out there? How are new technologies such as AI and RPA really impacting the future and the way which we approach quality engineering? And lastly, this is like a crystal box, and none better than Dominique, who's seeing both the buy side and the sell side, to be able to tell us something about what we might be seeing in terms of the trends in the future. Right. So that's in a nutshell. If you think that there's anything more that we would like to cover, please feel free to message us. We'll be happy to take that on. Right. Now, before we get there, I have one small poll that I would like to put out. It's a lot to do with how you as an organization are structured. How are you viewing the test center of excellence within? Be happy to just launch a quick poll, give yourselves a minute and get your views, your opinions on what you think is going to be the way that you are looking at. And well, that's not bad. I think there's been a fair number of votes. There is about 67% that's voted. Okay, there's about 20% of the votes have come in. Feel free, folks. I mean, you may not be directly a part of the QE team. You may be influenced by the QE team, but your votes do count, as they say. And no, it's not politics. So those who haven't voted, feel free to choose. We limited the options. I know there might be a lot more options that you might have. And one of the key things in this is because when Dominique talks about the overview of the QE market, gives us a sense of perspective about how his views also align with what we see. Okay, all right. So I think we've got a fair number of votes in. I'm closing the vote, the poll now. Let me share the results. Dominique, that's what we're seeing as a result. About close to 60% saying that my team is proficient in automation and exploration, and about 43 that are looking at distinct teams for both automation and exploratory testing. So indeed, a fairly healthy mix of amongst the two, and everybody, if you notice, are both in. I mean, there is automation that's happening. There's nobody saying I'm only doing manual testing, which would have been probably the response a few years back. Which leads me, Dominic, to a question that I have, and that's always, a few years back, we used to talk about monolithic QE teams. We used to talk about outsourcing contracts, and around QE being fairly large in size, and QA teams being responsible for at least commenting on the release risks at that point in time. It's kind of evolving now. You're seeing in the current DevOps world, you're seeing a lot of how would you say, a lot of integrated teams. QE is not just QE team members' responsibility. It's kind of shifting left to a large extent, etc. And shifting left, shifting right in whatever way that is happening, right? How are you seeing that evolution, Dominique? And would you like to share how you're seeing the QE market and its evolution and the testing center of excellence itself?
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Diwakar. A bit of a difficult question. I'll touch on what you're saying, and maybe hopefully during the presentation we'll address what you were asking. Certainly with digital, we've seen a shift to integrated testing and development or system integration. That's one. The role of the TCoE has changed quite a bit. We'll talk about this later on, from a functional factory into sort of an enabler, a service organization. So that probably what I would like to think about the changes in the QA market and the end of the monolithic QA teams. Yeah. So if we move on to the overview, still trying to think and to respond to your questions while we go through this presentation, but I think we've seen we've seen testing spending quite growing for the past 20 years or so, which has been a surprise initially through, I guess that's also monolithic managed, process consulting, and then from growing thanks to the large managed testing service contracts, and then through Agile and digital more recently for the past 5 years. So still, we're still finding high spending growth, between 5 to 10% each year in testing in QA, despite the pandemic and so forth. But the dynamics, the type of services, the type of spending has changed really, and so certainly with Agile, we've seen less monolithic type of QA activities. BFSI is still very much a sector that spends the most of all sectors, so probably 40% of all spending. And there's not a surprise, BFSI is still very much a buyer of application services into multi-year type of contracts. So whereas other industries tend to also buy application service in the form of project services, system integration, and so forth, BFSI, and to some extent retail and public sector in the US tend to buy multi-year contracts. And that's, of course, when you get multi-year type of deals, you get a business case for automation. And that's been driving mostly the testing market. The third point I'd like to mention is sort of a reality check is, we talk a lot about automation and shift left, shift right, specialized services, non-functional. We're finding that 84% of all testing spending is still very much on functional testing, and that includes automation. And then the rest, the specialized services, the non-functional, the UX, and so forth, and the test support services, that's still 16%. So still very much, despite all the work on automation, functional testing is still by far the vast majority of spending, which is always a surprise, but yeah, that's the reality check that we're making. And a consequence of this is because functional testing is the main sort of activity, and also manual testing is probably between 50 to 2/3 of all functional testing activity. Testing QE remains a very work-intensive, human labor-intensive activity, and therefore India remains sort of the primary delivery location. There's no other location than India, not only because of the cost, but also because of the talent and the ability to scale up. So 3 good reasons to go to India, really. And then we'll touch a bit more on the role of the TCoE. Again, back to your mentioning about the end of the monolithic type of testing activities. The TOS, so the Testing Center of Excellence, has really moved from a test factory to competence center. And if we move to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about what the TCoE is now. So again, that's largely because of Agile and the emergence of those Scrum teams with 5 to 8 members. We've seen now QA being much more decentralized, with functional testing mostly done in those Scrum teams. However, the logical consequence is that the TCoE then becomes a sort of a support organization to the Scrum teams in the QE members. So really providing tools and the continuous testing and DevOps tools now. So certainly bring more specialized and expert capabilities. The TCoE is really driving reskilling of manual testers, and the good news is we've seen that space is the reskilling of manual testers has been fairly effective. We were expecting a bit of churn, a bit of failure on manual testers, And from what we can tell, vendors like Trigent have been very good at reskilling their manual testers and upskilling their existing automation specialists. So that's been largely very good news. Again, the role of TCoE, we tend to not to talk too much about it, but what the TCO provides is what we call the test support services, so mainly test data management, test environment provisioning and decommissioning, and also a bit of service virtualization. And it's funny because the topic of test data, test environments comes back all the time. We do tend to talk about it, but it's never like the primary topic. But certainly one is a big blocker, road blocker in terms of leading testing project to success. And back to the TCoE new role, it's about new technology, also providing a technology roadmap. So trying to work with vendors like Trigent, but also the ISVs, and looking into the open source tools as well, and try to think about the future tools to use. One last comment on this slide. We're still seeing that there are several models for the TCoE and the QA members and the Scrum teams. So the usual model is having 2 QA specialists in the Scrum team, but we're also seeing some form of lesser decentralization, where for a given program or maybe a division, we'll see a decentralized QA team then supporting several projects in a given program. So I think clients and the IT services partner are still experimenting with the right structure and format. So yeah, I mean, thanks. Let's move on to the next slide then. And so this is a high-level view of where we see the client-dedicated TCoE. So of course, continuous testing, functional automation remains the priorities. That's at the top. And then bringing the specialist services we mentioned earlier, mobility, so more mobile device and mobile application testing, UX, test support, non-functional, shifting left with code quality. If you think about it, a lot of testing is still very much testing functional activities, so we're still around creating test scripts and executing them, but we're seeing much more emphasis on code quality, if only using the static code analysis tools. AI is going to be something we're going to talk about this in a few minutes. So this is the sort of new role of the TCoE, and I must admit, again, Indian vendors like Trigent have promoted this model, and it's proving quite effective, really.
Okay. So very interesting, Dominique, that there's a lot of sometimes when we see some of our clients when we work with a lot of the ISVs, and there are platforms that are doing high speed, high frequency releases. We see them, there's a lot of continuous testing that happens, and an equal degree of automation embedded there. We also see the challenge of them wanting to test across a wide variety of devices, etc. Right? So the ability to make sure that you delivering a seamless customer experience across all of this is across their entire application stack is important, and that's where we're seeing specialists who come in. You don't need to get a full-time specialist. You're saying part-time specialists come in, do a particular set of tests, exit, and you're seeing fungible test teams also that work. Because sometimes I think the challenge that we also struggle with is finding a testing expert that can create great tests, that can automate, very well, that can test across mobile devices, that has a good understanding of UX, and make sure that they have the right set of code quality checks embedded in and can test for performance. So we're seeing the test COE that we're deploying to client have more like a little bit of a shared service model, where a lot of different skills and capabilities come into place. So I trust that aligns with your thoughts also.
And yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I think you've got a very fair comment, really. Very accurate, actually.
Yeah. All right. Going on again, there is a whole lot of change that is happening in the quality engineering world. New tools, new processes, people challenges. What are you seeing, Dominic, both on the buy side and with organizations like Trigent, and what are you seeing as the major shifts in quality engineering from your perspective?
I think you alluded rightly to a very wide range of changes, whether it's tools and the move to open source and so forth. So I decided to take more of a functional nature type of focus. Well, testing activity focus, not looking that much into the open source or the different type of tools, but really looking about what has been driving testing spending and the changes, and that has been digital and agile. I think we talked slightly about agile, and we'll keep on talking about agile with DevOps and continuous testing. But the other side of the story, what has been driving spending in QE has been really digital. And that started maybe 10 years ago with mobile apps, and then expanding to front office as applications, so Salesforce and Adobe, and then to a lesser extent, more activity around data analytics, AI, and coming. What has been striking about those digital projects even, they're integrated, they're bundled testing and development implementation. And to some extent, these front office SaaS applications, they also not multi-year contracts, so they're more into sort of driving progression testing. And what we've seen really is about the challenge has been that in such short projects, there's usually no budget for QA. So a rise of manual testing initially that hopefully with then the clients aggregating all its Salesforce activities or programs then drives to more automation. But initially, when it's a fragmented effort at the level of automation, those projects is limited. I think demand for UX testing. So I think you touched on the fact that what I call compatibility testing, and I think you call customer success, or I'll find the right word. Thank you. Sorry, Diwakar. We found that demand for testing the different combination of devices and browsers and operating system that continues to be strong, and of course using the different cloud device, smartphone and device clouds. That demand has been strong in UX. And certainly accessibility testing has been strong and led obviously by regulations in the US, in Australia, and the English-speaking countries. So we'll touch on that a bit more, but then outside of those two, really demand for UX testing, usability research and testing has been fairly limited from a QA perspective. And another big trend that we've seen in the past 3 years and accelerated thanks to the pandemic has been the migration of applications from client server architecture to the cloud. What's interesting about this is suddenly you need the functional testing, you need the automation, but you also need to test the cloud infrastructure. And by the way, we as testing professionals, we're not always very much used to talk to our infrastructure colleagues. So that brings new organizational challenges, clearly. Diwakar, if we move on to the next slide, and thank you for this. Yes, I wanted to elaborate a little bit more on UX testing. As I said, we've seen accessibility and compatibility / customer success testing driving most of the UX testing demand. There certainly are other forms of UX testing, whether it's usability research and testing, with things like A/B testing, with going through prototypes and so forth. The challenge, and also SEO, so all the tools around search engine optimization and how to reference a website. What's striking about this is it's a fragmentation of tools, it's different skills that QA traditionally didn't have. Those skills are very often contractors. So we've seen usability research and testing very much escaping from the QA remit and being spent with smaller with subcontractors and smaller organizations, digital agencies, so to speak. What will on a personal side, I still think your usability research and testing and all the other forms of UX testing are going to be important. But I must say that we're talking about different type of skills, and also there's a very significant fragmentation of tools. So we haven't seen any platforms emerging yet, but I think in the next few years that's going to be a priority, and I expect to see platforms that would group all those fragmentation of tools. I think AI is going to be a big one as well in that space, because it's going to be bring automation in this space. So, yeah, next slide, please.
Yeah. All right. So thanks. I think you touched upon a fair amount, and just to put things into perspective, a lot of what we do, again, if I look at it from a digital assurance, and to us, a lot of digital assurance has been triggered by, as you said, the migration to the cloud, right? I mean, it's enabled not just the way people interact, it's the medium that they use to interact to that has changed, and the fact that customer experience, irrespective of whether it is functional, whether it's performance, security, whether it's making sure that you're compliant with accessibility guidelines, and that you across the various devices that you have, all of that has come in, and you touched upon the connected devices, connected experiences, not just mobile device phones, but also various devices, right? I mean, you have an Apple Watch, and you have health applications, you have other devices that send in different sets of health data back to the same application. So all of that are things that we have seen, and obviously, led to not just partnerships that we need to have in place to enable all of this, but also build in our own accelerators that allow for very quickly getting off the ground on these digital assurance services. So thanks, Dominique, for that insight about that. I just want to shift gears a bit, and again, we've talked about DevOps. We've talked about a lot of DevOps. We've talked about a lot of Agile. There is, and that is kind of leading into this, and the polls also indicated that about a fairly high number, 43% of the people actually have teams that can both test as well as automate, whereas another 60% are probably, I'm guessing, in the transition path where they're moving towards, whilst they have distinct teams of test engineers and automation folks, I think they probably in that transition path to make them a unified team. How are you seeing the client adoption of DevOps, continuous testing, the kind of challenges that you're seeing with automation being a critical element in that, and what's your take, Dominique, and what are you seeing with both the buy side and I think a lot of automation, I also see, at least we have our own automate framework that we bring into place, and I'm sure that's true with other players also, which compete potentially with or that leverage open source underneath. How are you seeing that entire DevOps, continuous testing, automation play out?
Thank you, Diwakar. So back to the poll. Saying that most clients have entered the functional automation journey, so to speak. So we still estimate, I think the industry benchmark is, say, 50% to 60, 2/3 of functional testing is still very much manual. And that's a high-level benchmark, but that's very pleasing to see your clients and moving into functional automation. So I think at a high level, in the past 5 years, we've seen functional automation morphing into what we call continuous testing. So really using the DevOps tools, and that clearly has been the number one priority thanks to Agile. And of course, the traditional, the goal of this is the in-sprint automation. So I'm not aware of any firm really being able to have in-sprint automation, but an N-2 type of automation is already impressive. Probably what I wanted to say is we're seeing, and that's the last bullet point, sorry, that those DevOps and functional automation has morphed into platforms that aggregate, obviously include the DevOps tools, but also include quite a number of other automation initiatives. So they really aggregate all the testing automation and in functional, of course, but also going to shift left. And that's number 2. So requirement analysis, static code analysis. I still think the testing industry needs to progress on moving from a test script focus to a quality focus, although that clearly evolving quite a bit. And I'm sort of touching on tools, but of course, the continuous testing journey is also very much an organizational transformation. So, not to underestimate the human factor. And also, again, one of my favorite topics is really about the test support services. So, if anything, integration of those continuous testing with test environment provisioning and decommissioning, and also test data provisioning, whether it's synthetic data or data masking, depending on the regulations. But really, we're seeing the tools now in this space, sometimes quotes rather than open source. And service virtualization as well is important as well. So we're seeing the emergence of those platforms that aggregate a lot of different automation initiatives well beyond DevOps, well beyond the continuous integration and automated release management tools. If we move on to the next slide. So let me sort of mention my wish list in a testing platform. So it'll be the feature I'd love to see, and we find now with quite of vendors. That's a testing framework. So usually it's a bit of a, probably not a scriptless framework, but very well thought testing framework with objects and a lot of repositories and so forth. Of course, integration with their various DevOps tools. So expanding to non-functional, so security, the SaaS and DAST and SCA tools, and accessibility testing as well, largely because now we're able to automate 50-ish% of all the regulations, of all the requirements set by WCAG, 2 point something. I've touched on test data management, test environment provisioning, of course, so that's a requirement. That's more than a requirement. That's a must. We'll talk about the AI use cases, but really now we're finding AI use cases can be used quite significantly to automate. So there are a number. I will go back on the AI use cases, but the defect predictions, that's quite a useful one as part of the testing of the DevOps tools. And we're finding again in an ideal platform, so to speak, API testing, static code analysis, reporting, of course. Yes, so that's the ideal scenario, but we're finding quite a few of those days. So it's very positive. And to be honest, vendors like Trigent have done so much work in the past 4 to 5 years on this space, and it's quite often it's relying again on open source tools. So it's a major benefit to the clients in terms of the tools. Of course, the next step, the next challenge is the creation of test scripts. That remains the bottleneck as well. So if we move to the next slide, thanks, Diwakar. Bit of a repeat with some add-on. So those platforms, yes, they're becoming aggregation points for automation. They go beyond the reference architecture. They're not yet products, but they really have preset integration with the open source tools and sometimes with the codes. That's the next point. And the good thing about it, because it's not a product, but it's way beyond the reference architecture, it's modular. So it's sort of progressing at the pace of the client. So that's very positive. And the last point I wanted to mention is usually those platforms are provided as part of the service. So again, the costs of bringing continuous testing is way well. If you exclude the license cost, that's a massive benefit for the client. So all in all, more functionality and less expensive. I think this is wonderful for the clients. If we move on to the next slide, please. And
Right. And
that's yours. Sorry.
yeah, and just to go back on what you were saying, right? I think in this whole continuous testing world, it's like at every stage of DevOps, you would need to have something that would assess the quality, be from a risk-based test framework, be it from static analysis, be it from bringing in tools, as you mentioned, that can work off, that can be adapted to a client context, accelerate your entire, how would you say, the automation itself. You spend more time creating automated scripts rather than trying to manage platforms, etc. And then the ability to test it across, at every build, at every release, across a whole lot of different devices or browsers, etc., depending upon the need, and provide a good, what I would call, operational readiness dashboard that allows you to assess risk of a release, that allows you to then deploy with confidence, with increased confidence, right? And as you then manage and support and maintain the application, you learn from that and figure out how do you need to move your learnings into improving your test itself. So that's kind of continuous testing world that we are seeing and deploying for our clients. And obviously, you did mention the reference architecture. You mentioned about modular frameworks that can support a wide range of testing, provides good reports, integrates with the DevOps pipeline, and also has AI ML capabilities that we can talk about as we go further. So in essence, these are what we are noticing from our clients. These are, again, there are two challenges that we need to deal with. One, the fact that we are not creating a platform that becomes then proprietary to a service provider, right? I mean, so sometimes tools tend to have that challenge that I create tools, I create tests on a certain tool set, and then unless I use that particular tool set, there's no way I can run my tests again. Whereas the philosophy that we come back with is that you should be able to, irrespective of the service provider, irrespective of the tool sets that you use, be able to go ahead and be able to confidently execute your tests by yourself, even beyond the life of a service provider. So that's the kind of change that we're seeing in the way that clients look at our framework versus what they look at from external tool sets, so to speak. Although, and the fact that it is based upon good, proven open source tool sets at the back. So that is it, and I think that's about our continuous testing philosophy and the real genie in the bottle, so to speak, right? And there's so much being said. AI is now a given. Everybody, it's like, hi, there's AI, and it's a new greeting, so to speak. But and I know that there are a fair number of use cases. We've applied a few in our test framework. The question that I always have is, would I base a release decision for a client based upon the AI that we have, based upon the learnings that our models have? How are you seeing the application of these new technologies, and how do you think that these new technologies need to be kind of judiciously used to that extent, given the fact that they are new and given the fact that they are in some cases proven, and what may work in one potential client situation may not work in another, just because the models are probably not fully trained. So what's your view, Dominique, on this?
Thank you, Diwakar. So we're really looking into, with AI, we're really looking into new use cases, new ways of automation for functional testing mostly. If I step back 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we had three big buckets of functional automation with AI, and that's what we call AI-based analytics. So that was around really looking at the test cases and trying to make sense, be clever in the test cases, looking at them. The other one was around defects. And sort of defect prediction was one of the major use cases. And the last one was really about what we call sentiment analysis. So getting feedback from the App Store or maybe the Facebooks and the social media, and get feedback on a given mobile app or maybe a web application, a website, and try to use clusters to find a reason for whether an application was liked or not. So those were the three buckets, and they were quite good actually. But to be honest, again, the IT service industry has been really innovative, and I truly mean it, in finding new use cases all over the place. So that slide is not to be read because it's not user friendly, but it's sort of trying to demonstrate that there is now a wide range of use cases in AI-based analytics. Having said that, there are some that are probably more quick wins than others, and others that are more complicated, but also have quite a lot of value. So let me pinpoint a few of those. The first one is test case optimization. So really, this is using an NLP technology to find similarities within test cases and find redundant test cases. To me, that's a quick win. No strategic clients won't disagree with that. It's fairly factual. Depending on the client, you might find 5 to almost 10% of redundant test cases. If those test cases were manual or led to scripts, that's quite a bit of savings. So even if it's 5%, that's still massive savings and that's a quick win. The other one I like is really looking at in production logs and trying to find how applications are used or what processes are used, and then putting the priority on the right test cases or the right transactions. Makes sense, but in the past it was more based on discussion with the power users and not as much based on production logs or using an agent on a PC. So it's a bit more scientific, and that's wonderful. Another one I like that is at the bottom is really about the security testing. When you use a DAST and SaaS tools, you get a lot of false positives. So at some point you think, what benefits that bringing me if I get a lot of false positive? Now with AI, we're starting to automate a bit that triaging phase a bit more. Of course, that's a beginning, but it's really going to the right direction. So and last point I wanted to mention, I'm getting conscious of time really, so I need to hurry up. But defect management, that's very powerful, but also requires quite a bit of good data for the past 6 months, 1 year, and also quite a good quality of data. So that's more transformational in that space. So that's why we're seeing quite a bit of pilots, not a lot of huge deployments, but certainly a lot of pilots and client interest. If we move on to the next slide, we're talking about the next phase of AI, which is really about what our marketing friends would call automating the automation. And in plain words, I would call automatically creating test scripts. As you know, the creation of test scripts and their maintenance is still very much a big topic. And that's not been addressed. So in the past, almost 20 years ago, we had the record and playback tools, but we all know that once there was a change in the objects in the UI, those scripts could not be run anymore. So we've seen now a couple of things, those playback and record and playback tools now being able to, first of all, to create those scripts, and then also to make up for changing the UI, changing the object, changing the repositories, and able to some extent automate the maintenance of those test scripts. So I think that's going to be the game changer if we manage to have automated test script creation and maintenance. Having said that, I'm excited about it. We're not seeing a lot of deployments at the moment. It's anecdotal, so it's hard to see if there's a huge trend. I don't think so, but I'm personally very excited by those next generation record and playback tools. Web crawlers, I won't talk too much, but that's a different way of creating test scripts in an automated manner. I'll probably want to go on to the next slide, and I think the next slide was around RPA. I think for the sake of time, we might skip it.
Yeah, we can go. We can come back to this a little later if there is a question on RPA and tool sets. Just so that just to reiterate what you had talked about, NLP being able to be able to leverage NLP to find what we call ontological similarities, right, and build a dictionary to not just ensure the right sets of test coverage traceability, but also eliminate duplicates. And one of the key things where we are deploying things like web crawlers is really in terms of creating digital twins, which help us with the challenge of service virtualization or even test data generation. So the ability to say this kind of a transaction evokes this kind of a response with this kind of a data is where we're seeing a real-time experience predictive simulator coming home. Other than that, we talked about a lot of the use cases that we did have. Lastly, before we sing, Dominique, I really want to put in your hands a crystal ball. And what are you finding exciting in this whole quality engineering space, and what's giving you the sense of hope that we as a quality engineering group as a function is licking the challenge of making sure that we're getting the right products out for our customers.
So let's have this crystal ball and let's prove ourselves wrong. But yeah, I think a few points here, some of which are easy and sort of easy to predict, and others that are a bit more controversial. Automation, I think what we're seeing, I think I mentioned earlier in the discussion, but we're finding now that the volume of testing are increasing faster than the headcount. So we truly see the productivity gains in testing now thanks to automation, and that's very healthy. So that's good. Having said that, testing remains a labor-intensive activity. Technology requires a lot of expertise more and more, especially if we're moving away from manual testing. So India has got a tremendous role to play. There's no question about it. The talent shortage, and even more importantly, the upskilling, that's not an easy task. Again, vendors like Trigent that spend their whole life about onboarding. So onboarding is something like vendors like Trigent have done, and training on the latest technology. So that's a major benefit. And then into the crystal ball, a bit more functional automation remains the priority. AI will play a role in that, a major role. So that's really the crystal ball, but I truly believe in it. And hopefully we'll convince you of that. And I'd like to finish my part by mentioning crowd testing. I know it's a very niche activity. In the world of the youngsters liking to, enjoying working off hours, having different ways of working models. I find crowd testing can be very complementary, especially for activities that cannot be automated, and also for UX testing, especially usability research and testing, and for the connected device and anything in the street of out of the lab. So crowd testing is one of my favorites, and I think it will play a very significant role for the future of testing. Diwakar, I'm sure you've got your own thoughts of this, so feel free to disagree and bring your own thinking.
No, you kind of covered a lot of it. We're seeing a huge trend towards automation. In fact, the demand for automation and I think some of the challenges that we have, given the increasing demand for automation, the gaps in skills, that's something that we kind of working towards to address. We have a ground to move people from reskill people back from automation, from manual testing to automation. Make sure that they work closely with dev teams. So the shift left is one thing that we're seeing a lot of. You brought that one point up before, where we're seeing a lot of that progression testing, where we're seeing people moving away from just automating regression suites to integrating testing as an essential part of every sprint, and get that done as early as possible. And this is not just unit tests; it's probably full-fledged tests. And we're seeing the emergence of tools like Mabel, etc., that allow us to very quickly automate UI also. So there is, yes, there is all of that we are able to that we and you kind of hit the nail on the head out here with a lot of your predictions. So thanks, Dominique. I unless you want to have any closing words, I'll just leave this open to any questions that people may have, and we'd be happy to take them on. Yeah, so Dominic, you mentioned about, I think I see one here. There is one on agile, continuous testing, and automation. Uh, I think the challenge really has been about moving uh, from let's say regression to progression testing, right? So what are you seeing as how people might be able to make that transition very effectively? What do you think are some of the things that go into making that happen? And to what extent should people do it? So I think if you can to touch upon that, that would be great, Tom.
Yeah, I think okay. So progression testing is sort of the holy grail. We still haven't addressed very well the lack of time and budget for building automation. So for short-term projects, it's been mostly manual testing activities. In a few cases, we're seeing a better organization might work. I'm thinking here of Salesforce projects where you're now getting several Salesforce projects within a large firm. So clever clients can, drive automation because they can aggregate different budgets across different flows within the same program. So I'll take a more longer view of the Salesforce projects and acknowledge that because it's a SaaS tools, there will always be a flow of new features, and therefore it makes sense to automate. So there's a sense of long-term vision and sense of organizational structure. But again, I think AI, if it actually succeeds in creating test scripts automatically, that'll be a fantastic way of bringing automation to short-term projects and to progression testing. So I'm a big believer in AI in that sense.
All right, that's great. Thanks, Dominic. This is interesting. Are you seeing Uh, and given the fact that there is a huge amount of uncertainty in the world thanks to the war that's happening in 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 Europe at this point in time, and hyperinflation that's happening in the rest of the world, uh, do you see any strains in terms of the budgets that people have? And if people are looking at budgets, what do they think? What do you think? Is QE going to be, usually gets an axe in a lot of budgets, but how are you seeing that at this point in time, Tommy?
Okay, so for a change, I'll be humble. The IMF and the different central banks don't have a vision yet on what's going to happen in Q4 of this year, of calendar Q4. On the personal side, for those firms that have Q4, that have calendar year budget cycle, and I'm expecting some reduction in the IT budgets. That's my personal opinion, and I need to be humble on that one. But and we know that if that happens, that almost happens overnight. So in one quarter, you get a very different view of the market. If anything, we still, and maybe that's a bit naive, but we're still expecting digital projects and enabling technologies such as cloud and security to be the #1 priority. And we're expecting then clients to save on run the business. So basically, move infrastructure to the cloud, adopt even more offshoring, and do reconsider the SLAs for application maintenance and support. Also reduce the footprint of our application, reduce the size or the number of applications. So trying to respond to this difficult question, I think we'll see the usual lever reduce the run expenses, but I think digital will remain strategic for now. If economic crisis was to last much longer, maybe we'll see some reduction in the digital part of the projects, but we're not at this stage yet.
Right. Thanks, Dominic. Dominic, another one. What practices are you seeing in terms of reskilling manual testers? Is there some good things, some bad things, some things that you'd like to share that you have seen across organizations that you have looked at and assessed?
I'm sure, Diwakar, you're better positioned than I am on that one because it's really your day-to-day activity. So, to be honest, and I need to acknowledge the talent that the organization like Trigent have shown. You've been very good at reskilling even manual testers, and that has been amazed. So in terms of the best practices, you probably know them better than I do, but let me acknowledge the effectiveness of the work you've done.
Thanks, Dominic. And I think just to complete that question, I think one of the key things that we always look at, and that's why I want to emphasize the word testers, right? I mean, you are a quality engineering person. You are looking at things from a QE perspective. Automation etc. are tools that enable you to get your work done a lot more efficiently. Sometimes I feel people tend to forget that, and they tend to, the fact that automation becomes a separate beast by itself, but they forget the fact that it is tester that is the primary skill that is first required. But again, really, it's about being able to uh, to to do simple things that can help save you time, be it in replication of test data, be it in being able to create virtualized services, be it in terms of integrating with DevOps, and all of this requires a period of time. So nobody becomes a great automation tester overnight. They learn how to code, they learn how to script, they then learn how to integrate with CI/CD, they then learn how to produce good reports that tell a story about how their executions have progressed. And lastly, then they also learn newer technologies as they progress and how they can adapt those technologies, things like AI, etc., into their testing. So I think the reskilling is a stage by stage. Some accelerate very quickly. Some are good at doing certain key tasks, and we need people of uh, all of those different capabilities. So that's essentially what it is. Okay, best practices in agile and continuous testing. I think we touched upon that. We like at the hour, probably exceeded the time. We will send any responses back to people. If you all have anything, feel free to reach out and drop us a mail. We'd be happy to respond. You know, I'll share those questions with Dominique, and I make sure that we get some responses from him. But and so I think we've come to the end of this session. Dominique, I really appreciate the time that you've taken, the patience that you've shown in terms of going through your thoughts, going through the entire uh, gamut of changes that the quality engineering field itself is going through, and being able to give people things that they can reflect on and take a bite or two going forward. So thanks a lot. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for inviting me, and really thanks for bringing your own knowledge and experience in this topic. So thanks again to yourself.
Thank you, Dominique. Have a great day. Have a great evening. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and see you all soon.